Hello, everybody. A warm welcome here to the Wine with Jimmy channel. Thank you for stopping by. This is a wine channel designed to help those of you wanting to get really to grips with the world of wine, and specifically designed for those of you studying the world of wine for courses like the WSET. So welcome to a series here on the wonderful California, the Golden State. And we are on series 4, looking at the North Coast and, of course, the famous, the iconic Napa County, Napa Valley. So this is a 5-part series. We're on part 3 here, looking at the growing environment of the mountain AVAs that we find in Napa Valley. This is a free content video. All other videos in this series are only available at my e-learning portal. That's the details at the bottom of the screen, winewithjimmy.com. Okie dokie, let's rock and roll looking at the Napa Valley AVA. So here on this map is the Napa County. Okay, so all of that area, including all of that sort of grey area that you see in the northern part of that. The Napa Valley AVA, that's American Viticultural Area, encompasses the whole valley, but also within it, it has 16 smaller American viticultural areas. These are what we call nested AVAs or sub-AVAs. Examples of those are all up here in these colourful areas: Carneros, Coombsville, Oak Knoll, Yountville, Stag's Leap District, Atlas Peak, Mount Veeder, and so on. So we're talking about sort of 18 to 19,000 hectares of vines here. So it's actually quite small in the grand scheme of iconic fine wine regions. And we have those smaller AVAs that can be found on the label. Now, there is a link. So if you do have a smaller one like Rutherford AVA or Oakville AVA, the words Napa Valley still need to be found on the label as well. Now, we've come here for this presentation to learn about the mountain AVAs. And typically in Napa, we divide Napa Valley between the valley floor, which we went through in the previous video, to the mountain AVAs that we're going through in this video. So that's a very typical divide. So the vineyards in the mountains, either side of the valley floor, so the Mayakamus or the Vaca Mountain range, are generally above the fog layer. So I've got a picture here, which is actually taken from Howell Mountain, but you'll see that the fog layer goes up to a certain height. It's around 1,400 feet, so around sort of 400 odd meters. So with this, it means that the mountain AVAs, a lot of the vineyards actually lie above this, what we call fog line or fog layer. So being above this fog layer means that they are not consumed by the fog, and therefore there is no dilution of sunlight. So it sits above it. So basically vineyards above this layer in most of these mountain AVAs get longer hours of sunlight, more UV light. And that means, of course, you've got the potential for better ripening of the grapes. So you're going to get more ripeness and concentration, more skin, and you tend to get more color and then more polymerization of tannin, which means you get more structure, more ripe tannin, more darkness in the wines, very typical of these. So great levels of tannin, as it says there. But also, we've just talked about this indirectly from that last slide. We are above a fog layer and we're at altitude. So the cooling influence for these mountain American viticultural areas here in Napa Valley is the altitude, up to sort of 800 meters. So this means that the mountain vineyards have less temperature extremes and hence a lower diurnal range, the difference between night and day. In general, the combination of climate and soils mean that the wines from the mountain AVAs have the tannins that we mentioned on the last slide, but then the acidity that you will find from altitude. So there is a brightness to these wines as well. In their youth, they're typically exceptionally floral and they can be spicy. And then that gives them real longevity. The tannin and acidity balance at quite high levels gives them very good aging capability. Here's the beautifully situated Mayakamus vineyards, which looks over the Mount Veeder area, and you'll see that really you've got some absolute exquisite views to be seen there, which is quite magic. Some of the highest vineyards we find in Mount Veeder, for example. So let's talk about the Mayakamus Mountains then. So the Mayakamus Mountains are what sit on our westerly side of Napa, separating Sonoma County and Napa County. So that's our natural geographical feature here that sits on the west of Napa Valley. We find some AVAs here, of course. So Mount Veeder is the first one. So this is in the southwest of the valley, and it's, of course, adjoining Sonoma County. So I've got the map up here on the left-hand side. So I've kind of done it in one monotone red, and then I've highlighted the area that we're specifically looking at here in yellow. And to the west of this will be Sonoma County, for example. So this is the coolest, potentially psychologically, but really more in terms of temperature, the coolest mountain AVA. And in fact, Cabernet Sauvignon grown here can sometimes struggle to ripen with these cool conditions. Now, the name of Mount Veeder, the etymology comes from a Dutch Presbyterian pastor called Peter Veeder, who lived in Napa during the Civil War era. The elevation of vineyards here are 150 to a whopping 800 meters, and of course also with mainly east-facing vineyards. So that's quite important. Not only are we at high altitude here, like we saw in the Mayakamus picture, Mayakamus Vineyards picture on the last slide, but also here, Mount Veeder Winery, the Rosenquist branch. You've got this high altitude, but then you've got the sun often behind you to the west in the afternoon, casting a shadow with these east-facing vineyards. So meaning that you've got some really cool conditions in place here, certainly cool for Napa standards. For sure. So we'll call this a cool to moderate climate. Most vineyards sit above the fog line, meaning warmer nights, cooler days, and less diurnal range than the valley floor. Typical mid-summer high temperatures sit around 29 degrees Celsius. And we're basically on sedimentary soils here, based on sandy loam texture that are shallow and generally well drained, as well as low in fertility and a little bit on the acidic side. So that's our lowest Mayakamus mountain range AVA here, called Mount Veeder. Then we're moving up now, coming to Spring Mountain AVA. So this is located at a low point in the Mayakamus Mountains on the western side of the Napa Valley. The AVA is one of the more northernly in Napa. It covers around 3,400 hectares of rolling vineyard, scrubland, and forest in the hills just south of Diamond Mountain District and Calistoga. So Calistoga is here and Diamond Mountain is just next to it. So that those are two bordering each other, and we're south of that with Spring Mountain AVA. It's named for natural springs that surface throughout the area. And Spring Mountain is not actually just one single peak. It's more like a group of mountains. Elevation, again, quite high, 180 to 800 meters on sedimentary soils like weathered sandstone and shale, which are quite loamy in its texture. Drainage is high and fertility is low. It's cool to moderate depending on the elevation and aspect. And once again, most vineyards sit above the fog line, providing warmer nights and cooler days than the valley floor. So we have typical sort of midsummer temperatures, again at around 29 degrees Celsius. Then we have the one just north of that. We have Diamond Mountain. Now, this is that kind of northwest portion of Napa Valley AVA. It sits, of course, next to Calistoga, and it's named after Diamond Mountain. It's a nice and easy one. Elevation a little bit low on average, 120 to 670 meters on residual uplifted soils of volcanic origin. Often it's reddish, fine-grained, even gritty, and it has some sedimentary weathered aspects to it as well. We'd say this is kind of moderately warm, and it has lower maximum temperatures and higher minimum temperatures than the valley floor due to the topography and altitude. But it'll get up to highs summer of around 32 degrees Celsius, so a little bit warmer in this instance. If you have any comments or questions on this video, or perhaps on Napa, maybe you've been to Napa Valley, maybe you've been to some of these AVAs, maybe you like the wines, please do get in touch and comment on this video below. Okay, so we've done our western mountain range. We go to the eastern mountain range, which is the Vaca Mountain range. So let's have a look here. The most important. So we've now moved across to the eastern side. This is kind of northeast. And we come to the Howell Mountain AVA. So it's kind of due east of St. Helena. It's in the Vaca Mountain range. And the AV has a definition in terms of where the vineyards have to be. It's a minimum of 430 meters, which is the fog line, the fog layer at 1,400 feet. So vineyards sit at 430 to 800 meters. So high altitude, on average higher than anything else that we've been talking about. And Howell Mountain and the entire mountain range took its name from Isaac Howell and family, who moved to the mountain range in 1846. Volcanic soils here that are shallow and infertile. Drainage is high, fertility is low. So, of course, knowing that by law it has to sit above 430 meters, it sits above the fog layer. Of course, you're going to get really dry conditions here. It's the warmest and driest AVA. So you'll find often very deep, concentrated, colorful wines, which will have good acidities behind them, but very much structured tannins through very accomplished polymerization of tannins at the end of the season. That's the Dancing Bear Ranch, a part of Cake Bread Cellars. Then we come down here to a place called Atlas Peak. We'll jump up to Charles Valley in a minute. It's one I've added in. It's not in your syllabus. There's only two in the diploma actually mentioned for the Vaca area, which is Howell Mountain and this one, Atlas Peak. But I will add on the Charles Valley in a second as well. So this is located on the western slopes of the Vaca range, which separates Napa and Sacramento valleys. And it's named for Atlas Peak, the most prominent peak, which sits at about 820 meters of altitude. Vineyards here, so the elevation here is 230 to 800 meters on volcanic soils in origin. They have a basalt quality to them, but it's kind of darkish red in color. Shallow with limited water retention, and irrigation is actually something that has to be administered here in this area. Cool, mountain influenced, with temperatures sitting at around 6 to 8 degrees cooler than the valley floor in summer. It's above the fog line mostly, and there is low day to night temperature range here, with summer temperatures rarely rising above 32 degrees Celsius. This is Elan Vineyards in our picture. And then we come to our final area, which is the Charles Valley. So this is a small AVA in the eastern hills, and it resembles a long sort of snake approach, thin scar slicing through the hillside between St. Helena and Lake Berryessa. In 1841, Joseph Ballinger Charles, I believe, was a man from Missouri who fought in the Seminole Wars and was granted Mexican citizenship, was given 2-league piece of land known as Rancho Catacula by Governor Manuel Michotorena. So the history stems from his name, the etymology. Now, a claim was filed in 1852, but it wasn't until 1865 that the grant was issued to Joseph Ballinger Charles. The Charles House, which was built in 1856, is one of the oldest homes in Napa Valley. Vineyards here, 180 to about 370 meters, with the valley floor being primarily fertile alluvial soils that has kind of a silt clay composition and, like I mentioned, fairly fertile. And the hillsides are more clay loam and a bit more stony clay, mostly sedimentary with some volcanic outcropping with less fertility. Fairly warm summer days here, so typically sort of 29 to 31 degrees Celsius. And we have some fogs here as well. It can be quite chilly at nighttime, down to about 10 degrees Celsius. Harvest comes later here than places like Oakville down in the valley, for example. This is brown estates you can see in this picture. Okay, let's have a look at a Google Earth video to bring it all to life. Let's focus on California and, of course, on Napa County, looking at the Napa River that runs through it, of course, creating the Napa Valley north of the San Pablo Bay. So here you go. Now, we're going to be focusing here, of course, just to recap, on the mountain AVAs sitting above the fog layer. And normally we're looking at vineyards going up to somewhere around 800 meters. So, 430 meters to 800 meters is very typical. And we're going to focus on two mountain ranges, the west, which is the Mayakamus, and the east, which is the Vaca. So they're the two sections that we just split it down in the theory that we just went through. So first of all, the Mayakamus mountain range, and there are three AVAs here that they wish you to know about. First of all, Mount Veeder, which sits in the southern section. This is the coolest, remember, and it's on east facing for the most part, and somewhere between 150 to 800 meters of altitude. And there you are. And of course, the limit of this goes down to many parts of the valley and the bench, like Oakville, Rutherford, etc. Then next we have Spring Mountain sitting above it. Now this is not as cool as Mount Veeder, just a bit warmer. And it's also east facing at 180 to 800 meters of altitude. Some wonderful fresh examples made here, including Spring Mountain vineyards as well. And then north of that and warmer still is Diamond Mountain AVA on volcanic-based soils, around 120 to 670 meters. So generally lower altitude, warmer soils, and in a more protected area from the San Pablo Bay. So that completes our western area of the Mayakamus. Next, we have the Vaca range, which also has three main AVAs in it that they require you to know. First of all, in the northern section is Howell Mountain, which is the warmest and driest of the mountain AVAs. It must be, by law, above 430 meters, and vineyards tend to go up to about 800 meters here. And of course, a lot of this is west and southwest facing. Then we have the Atlas Peak AVA, which has a bit of moderation because it's mountain influence, so a bit cooler, and it's 230 to 800 meters of altitude, but not hugely densely populated, the Atlas Peak AVA. And then even smaller still is the tiny AVA of Charles Valley. So this is at quite low altitudes, talking about 180 to 370 meters. And in fact, it's spread out in quite a few variable sites, as you can see from the Google Earth image just there. Well, I hope that's given you a good indication of how it looks and where they are located. Thank you for joining me. Okay, well, that brings me to a conclusion for part 3, looking at the mountain AVAs. Next video, we'll start to talk about typical vineyard management across the whole valley and the geology, which I've mentioned, I've peppered into with the AVAs that we focused on today and on the previous video, but we'll go through more of the complex geology of the valley. Now, if you have any comments or questions or concerns, please do get in touch. You can do so by commenting on this video, comment below. Make sure you click like and subscribe. Have you been to Napa? Have you been to one of the mountain AVAs or valley floor? Do you like the wines? Can you afford Opus One? Get in touch and let me know. If you do find yourself in the UK, then come and say hi. Come down to London City and join me for a class, glass or bottle. I've been Jimmy Smith. Ciao for now. Goodbye.